Hey everybody! Hopefully this is working. Hi. I am Sirabi. It is wonderful to see you, and I hope we are doing really well today. Fantastic, because we are going to be doing some Dungeons and Dragons today. So I do hope that you've got your books, I hope you've got your dice, I hope you've got your stories and everything are ready to go. Because we're going to get into this, we're going to get rocking and rolling here just a little bit. So let me calm down my music, my muzak, all the way down. So hopefully that's just going to be something small there. All right, fantastic. So what is it? What is the topic of the day? Because what I really want to be doing here is be able to talk about campaign creation. A place where dungeon masters, game masters, and yes, even those individuals that are interested in telling their story, even writing in a fantastical setting, you guys, you aspiring authors, will get a lot out of this, and naturally, we're going to get a lot out of you. So here goes. I do hope that you, feel free to, if you like what I say, of course, feel free to subscribe, feel free to like the video. I'd appreciate it. And also hit that little notification button just to know when I go live and when I post something new. Just real briefly here, we are going to be starting the entire chat. We're going to start this whole thing off by talking about how it is that starting from the very beginning of campaign creation of that world building, how can we make sure that we capture the imagination of our players? Yes, it starts that early, and it's something that's really important to make sure that you have something good in mind and that you keep this philosophy with you as we keep going on forward. Now, I do have a little chat box going on, so if you want to say something live, by all means, feel free to. I'm just going to actually run this little test because I do want to say hi there. And send, and there we go. And it is very, well, it's there. It's there. I'll work on all the settings and stuff like this as more go on. But again, hi, welcome. Let's start talking. Again, DM 101, Dungeon Mastering 101, capturing the imagination of your players. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk a little bit more about the details as to the whys for it. Of course, you don't need to take it from me. Towards the end of this, I'm going to get a very special quote from a very special person who's been dead a long time, but he is one of the masters and the founders of modern fantasy. And then, of course, we're just going to continue to talk. Once I'm done the topic of the day, I would like to just chat with you, with other players, with other dungeon masters, other game masters. Once again, if you're an author, please feel free to jump on in, because what we want to do, what we want to talk about is all the things, give me your adventures, give me your no shit, there I was stories, so that we can just share and laugh and have a good time and learn from each other. That, of course, being the biggest thing. So here we go. Okay, so DM 101, capturing the imagination of your players. This is something that starts with a term that is a literary term. It is called, and you've heard this before, most of you, if you are anywhere from your junior, senior years of high school to studying this a little bit in college, if you had to take some of those, 200 level English classes, from before, you've heard this term before. It's called suspension of disbelief. How do you make an unbelievable world believable? That's what suspension of disbelief is. It is a purposeful, slightly instinctual set of mind of your audience, of your players, of your readers, of whomever it might be. These individuals who are listening to you or playing your game have to make that decision, have to make that conscientious decision to believe what it is that they're being told, even though they don't really, even though they know it's not. One of the best definitions I've read for this is the intentional avoidance of critical thinking or logic in explaining something surreal, such as a work of speculative fiction, in order to believe it for the sake of enjoyment. So let's go into that a little bit. It's purposeful. Yes, you do have to do this. Your players have to make up their mind that, yes, I'm playing this game. So as an example, one of our favorite games is Dungeons and Dragons. Well, guess what, guys? I'm afraid to say there's no such things as dragons, at least in the sense that we all would love it to be, that of the elemental breathing variety, that of the wings that can soar. Yeah, you've got a lizard called the Komodo dragon, but that's about as close as you get in real life IRL. Sorry, they don't exist. You know that, I know that. So in order to even play the game that we want to play, the game that we enjoy so much, we have to say, okay, yes, I know I'm going into a fantasy setting. I know this is something that is nothing that we're talking about here is real. So I'm going to have to suspend my disbelief so that we can actually play the game. When it goes to ghosts, goblins, orcs, hobgoblins, you name it, the undead, all those type of things, we have to suspend that feeling of disbelief. We have to suspend that this is just so unrealistic. I mean, come on, you've got corpses that are walking around and that are trying to kill me. That is just totally unrealistic. I'm not having fun with this whatsoever. No, that's not how the game is played. It is something purposeful that your players have to do, okay? In order, again, for the sake of enjoyment. Now, remember, this is all still fantasy. This is all still make-believe. This is a grown-up game or teenager game as well of make-believe, of interactive storytelling, okay? We don't want to get in too deep. We do not want to get in too deep. Many people, if you completely suspend your disbelief, then slightly embarrassing things can happen. And some of the classic examples that we got from movies and the like really early on in our history, in the history of media, was, for an example, people yelling at the screen or at the movie screen, behind you! Or literally standing up to call 911 when they're in a movie theater, when they see someone die or someone's murdered there up on the screen. That is a little bit too deep, okay? We all know, very few of us, yes, we might scream. Yes, we might duck out of the way of something flying at us. Yes, especially in some of those 3D movies, things can feel very real. And that suspension of disbelief is, that disbelief, everything feels real, and you got to remind yourself that it's just fake, that this is just for enjoyment, this is just to play, all right? So there's got to be a balance. And yes, if you're a dungeon master, your number one job is to make sure that your players are having fun. And to make sure, one of the things to make sure that they do so is that this is not real, okay? This is not real. The characters we're playing are not real. The deities that we're playing or pretending with are not real. The monsters, the situations, no. But for the sake of this game, for the sake of the couple hours or late night sessions, early morning sessions, all right, fine. For the next several hours, when you, the player, are playing Dungeons and Dragons with me, the DM, we're going to cast this little spell and suspend the disbelief so that for now, it is real. And that's when magic happens, all right? That's when magic can happen. Now, again, is it hard to do? Is it hard for a dungeon master to create that sense, to be able to make sure that your players are engaged, it's not as difficult. If you remember, again, let's go back to some of the early history of media. Some of the most famous movies, very successful early movies in our time: Casablanca, The Miracle Worker, It's a Wonderful Life. Those started to train us about that suspension of disbelief. Were those high fantasy movies? No, not at all. But it still was a little bit unbelievable. Very much so. Yet our audience, as Americans as a whole, were easily able to watch these and adapt to what wasn't real to be able to enjoy the movies. The biggest factor among them, they were in black and white. Every one of those movies early on, Casablanca, Miracle Worker, Wonderful Life, were in black and white. So these are not movies that are, with, surround sound and all these things that we enjoy in our modern time. These were black and white. And very, very, very few people see the world in black and white, either literally or figuratively. The modern day paladin, as it were. No, most of us see life in color. And so watching something in black and white should jar our logical senses. This is not real. But we're able to suspend that to enjoy the movie, to enjoy the shows. All right. So how is it that we can create this suspension of disbelief for our players? Okay. This has been studied. This has been researched. There's one term out there that they use called, and that term is verisimilitude. Okay? Yes, it's a long word. Yes, it's a nerdy word. But guess what? This channel is called Sirabi Nerds On. We are talking about a very nerdy game. Deal with it. Verisimilitude. Vera, meaning truth. Similitude, meaning similar. What's similar to the truth? Okay? When you present something to your characters, when you present something to your players, is it similar enough to the truth for them to believe it? Okay? That pretty much goes on. How can we, from the beginning of our world creation, our campaign creation, creating those adventures, all those little things, how is it that you and I, as dungeon masters, can create that world to make sure that verisimilitude exists, to assist our players with dropping their disbelief and engaging with us? The very first topic, very first one, you ready for this? Consistency. Consistency. In your world, whatever your elements that you've incorporated are things consistent? Or are they kind of haphazard? Players look for this. Okay, let's be honest. Players depend on this. They are depending on you, the DM, to be consistent with the facts that you're presenting. I'm not necessarily saying that if you forget the name of an inn or the innkeeper in some particular inn somewhere, that your players are going to lambaste you for it. No. But if this world is about, I don't know, if it's about a high amount of technology throughout the world, then with technology's grasp being in each and every singular aspects of our lives, then to have a part of your world be a basic technology that's so fundamental. As an example, let me just go ahead and use one of our modern examples. If you were to do a high tech, a future technology world, got it? And the only way people could communicate with each other outside of earshot was on a land-based phone line. I mean, that's not consistent with what it is you're trying to do. You might try to put it in there for some sort of balance, but it's going to throw people off. It's going to throw people off. So how do you make sure to be consistent with this? Again, just first and foremost, take notes. Take notes yourself of the different things that you're creating. When it comes to a campaign, when it comes to an adventure itself, when you have to make things up on the spot, and I promise you, you will. You absolutely will have to make things up on the spot. My suggestion is just write this down. Whatever it is that you have to come up with, write it down. It's that simple, okay? Just write it down. Everything should be good. Second part, okay? To help with this, you're going to have to study. I know it's hard. And this is actually something that is, the study is not just if you create your own world, but if you are adopting an adventure or a campaign setting or something to your own. Okay, if you're adapting this to your own world, then yes, you're going to have to study what it is that's there. Study your own notes. If you are talking about a cult of a particular religion, make sure that you study the deity of this, that this cult is worshiping, okay? Both the enemies, just to make sure that your knowledge as Dungeon Master is deeper than what is going on, make sure that your knowledge as the Dungeon Master is deeper than you think your players are going to want. Because they're going to surprise you in every way, shape, or form about where they're going to take the adventure. And that's something that you want in your back pocket. If you have to make things up, make it up by all means. But just write it down so that for posterity, you can incorporate that into your world. You can incorporate that into your canon, and everything is good. Okay, so again, consistency. Players are going to need this. Make sure that you take notes, and make sure that you study what is either provided for you or what you created in the first place. Second key to verisimilitude. Things need to make sense. Logical sense. There is nothing worse, okay, than the DM saying something off. Now, this is me as a player. The DM spouting something off that just doesn't make sense. Either that my character wouldn't do that, or the world, something's not right here, without much of an explanation. So in order for things to make sense, okay, if you come up with a fact, if you come up with something as, outlandish or whatever, you have to ask yourself a couple questions, okay? The first one you have to ask is the why question. If magic exists in this world, okay, and you have deviated from the typical Dungeons and Dragons magic, okay, you might want to ask why. Why is it like this? Why is it that magic works in this way? Why does that work? If you're really interested in learning about non-Dungeons and Dragons styles of magic, I suggest there's an author out there I really suggest you read up on. His name is Brandon Sanderson. Fantastic author. He's created many series, and each one of these series has a completely different system of magic. Similar in the way that J.R.R. Tolkien created those books so he had a place for his languages that he was creating. He created several different languages, needed some place to put them, and so wrote The Hobbit, and afterwards The Lord of the Rings. In a similar way, Brandon Sanderson wanted to create different forms of magic, how this worked, how that worked. The magic that is apparent in the, I think it's called Words of Radiance. That's either one of the books or Stormlight Archives. The Stormlight Archives, how magic works there is very different than how magic works in Mistborn. Okay? Two different series, two different sets of magic, and two different systems of magic. Okay. Once you answer the question why, All right, so we have a dragon that's in charge of this city. Okay? Kind of outlandish to have a dragon in charge of your city, so why? Ask the why question. Why? How did he get to be in charge of that? And then you want to answer that. Okay? This happens to be a city that has a dragon cult that has established leadership, has come out into the open as this cult, has been accepted, give or take, more or less, by its populace, and then they have this dragon cult has named this particular dragon, good, bad, or indifferent, as the leader of the city, and that the dragon cult are basically the dragon's administrators. Okay? Great. Okay, fine. You gave a fact, something outlandish. A dragon is in charge of the city. Really? Okay, how does that happen? Why? Answer the why question. There's a cult that worships the dragon. That cult just happened to get into positions of power after years or decades of being undercover, etc. Eventually come out as this dragon cult. Once they've got all the positions of power, nobody can argue with them. Who knows? Based off of the nature of the dragon, nobody might want to argue with them, because very few people want to argue with the dragon. It doesn't tend to turn out very well. So from that, so you've got the how. Okay, you've got the why. Why is this dragon in power? Because the dragon cult that worshipped him got into power and then handed him the reins, as it were. Cool. Great. Then you need to ask yourself another question. And that's the what else question. Okay. So if this dragon is in charge of the city, what else? What else? Well, do you think taxes might be a little high compared to other cities? I would have to agree with that assumption. So if a dragon is in charge of your city, chances are taxes are going to be higher. Does that make sense? Does that make logical sense? Yes. And so a player who's bringing their character into the city for the first time that has to pay an exorbitant toll just to get into the city. Why? Oh, wait, there's a dragon in charge? And all the administrators of the city are supporting this dragon? And the dragon's lust for gold? And yeah, okay. Yes, check. Things start to make sense. The players are having an easier time believing in what it is that you're saying. If you just give them nothing, no reason, no explanation, even if they ask or investigate, because you say it just is what it is, that's not helping your players. That's not helping them look past the unbelievable. It's not helping them believe in the unbelievable. And you can have some problems there, okay? Once again, this starts to build depth to your world just by asking those two questions. Why? And what else? Just by asking those two questions of things, then of items that are in your world that might be unbelievable or that might be unique to a campaign setting, that builds depth. It also builds trust. It builds, believe it or not, it builds a degree of trust between the player and the dungeon master. The player starts to loosen their guard, starts to drop that sense of disbelief, suspends it purposefully, and then is willing to believe more and more of what the dungeon master is saying. If you're and the biggest reason for doing this, there are two reasons, okay? The first one is that it really is going to help your characters live in this environment. It's going to help them live in the environment, helps them buy into what it is that you're doing. The second one, of course, is that it's going to prevent arguments from the first place. You are always going to get arguments from when your characters are acting in character. It's going to happen. But one thing that we can knock off, cut it off right from the bud, okay, is the that argument between player and dungeon master. If that player just turns around and says, that is so unrealistic, that's ridiculous. My character would not behave that way. That character would not behave that way. I mean, there's no reason for it. I mean, you know, fine, the world, everything is backwards and inside out and whatever. No, I'm having a hard time here. And when that disbelief comes out, when that disbelief takes hold and the player no longer believes what the dungeon master is trying to paint the world as being, because it's just too unrealistic, that's a problem. That's a problem. That's when some arguments can come out, and we really just don't want to do that, okay? As a dungeon master, as a beginning DM, as an advanced dungeon master, as a lifelong DM, you gotta keep asking yourselves these two questions: why and what else? And if you keep doing that and you take notes when you're doing this, when you're coming up with these things, then yes, a player is willing to say that dragon is in charge of that city. And it feels logical as to how he got there. And the city itself feels logical, feels real, because you're seeing the consequences of having a dragon be in charge. Could be fantastic stuff. You could do a lot of really good stuff as long as you ask those questions, okay? Preventing arguments, immersing players in the world, doing a fantastic thing. Now, I did state earlier that I would bring one of our heroes of the past and his take on this very subject. And so, unfortunately, again, he's long dead, so I can't bring him in for an interview. But we can read his words. The words of the famous J.R.R. Tolkien. He helped to create, didn't help to create, he created one of the most fantastic worlds of the world of Middle-earth that we still take so much inspiration from, and we take a lot. You know, we've obviously hopefully you've seen the movies, hopefully you've read the books, but if you're a dungeon master or if you're an aspiring DM, there is an essay that he wrote called On Fairy Stories. On Fairy Stories. That was the title of his essay. And in there, he does talk about suspension of disbelief, although he says, really, you never want to get to that point. He says that in order for the narrative to work, your narrative, your story, in order for that to work, the reader, the player, the movie watcher, the person, your audience must believe that what they're seeing and reading is true within the secondary reality of the fictional world. Okay, this is our reality, IRL, in real life. All the games we play, all the adventures that we go on, all the campaigns that we have, all the books that we read has a secondary reality to it. And that secondary reality has a few tenets. 1, dragons exist. 2, monsters exist. 3, magic exists, etc., etc. 4, the technology is that of medieval ages. 5, there are governments and the like that are more medieval. No, I mean, you just grab the book, Dungeons and Dragons. That's what it's about. And that's the secondary reality. The reader, the audience has to believe that secondary reality is true. And by focusing on, this is his words, by focusing on creating an internally consistent fictional world. Once again, internally consistent fictional world. Okay. Sauron is real. He wants to take over the earth. Okay, fine. He creates an army of orcs to do so. Okay. Fine. Interesting. Kind of starts to make sense. Well, how did that happen? Well, he bred elves. They were bred and created from the elves. Tortured, mutilated, all that stuff. You guys know the story. All right. So this monstrous race was created from a very powerful race. And Sauron's going to, has created these, bred these, etc., to take over the world. That's internally consistent with that fictional world, with that fantasy setting. By focusing on creating an internally consistent fictional world, the author makes secondary belief possible. Suspension of disbelief is only necessary when your work, your world, your presentation, your story has failed to create that secondary belief. Okay? So again, because at that moment the spell is broken. If there is once a person's suspension of disbelief fails and disbelief comes back in, the spell is broken. It's no longer reality. It's no longer reality for the purposes of reading this book, for the purposes of watching that movie, for the purposes of playing Dungeons and Dragons under your administration, under your guidance as Dungeon Master. Once that spell is broken, that's it. It's going to take a little bit to get them pulled back in. It's going to take a willingness of the player to get back in. All right? So that is, in essence, from the beginning, before you create your world, before you create your adventure, before you start things off, guys, genuinely, you have to make sure that you focus on that suspension of disbelief, creating that internally consistent fictional world. And that's the key. It's just got to be internally consistent. If this is true, then that is true. If catfolk exist, then what else needs to be happen for them to be consistent with it? Okay? If you create a race of catfolk, well, we all know cats. Okay? Catfolk is similar to the truth, but not necessarily so. But if you have something like, okay, I'm going to create catfolk in my world. Great, excellent. How many pups do they have? Oh no, they lay eggs. They lay eggs? Yes, they lay. No. No, that is the opposite of verisimilitude. Okay? You create catfolk, great. Have them have litters of kits, okay? Makes sense. Because that's truer to the, more similar to life. The biggest thing is you got to keep it simple. Don't go crazy. Yes, you can create a lot of fantastical things, but they just have to be internally consistent. It has to be based off of laws and reality that we're familiar with. Or if they are different, it still needs to be consistent. So there you go, guys. I do hope that you've enjoyed this little semi-presentation. If you find that this is useful, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe. I would appreciate it. And I'm just looking around to see if we have anybody who is out there wanting to chit-chat or the like. If you don't want to, if you're just watching to enjoy, by all means, that's perfectly fine. But I've done Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. I enjoy it. I truly do. I love creating these worlds. I love creating these elements. So I've been trying to create a place for us as players, as dungeon masters, for us to be able to interact with each other, share stories, and the like. If you're interested in that, please subscribe. Please hit that little notification button. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will talk to you all